Hi, my name is Alan. I'm a business designer, and welcome to the Beyond Users podcast, where we learn about business to become better designers who not only solve user challenges but also achieve business goals. In the ninth episode, I spoke with Ben Burns. Ben is an award-winning designer who is currently a digital director at Blind, which is a brand strategy design consultancy based in California. And he is also a COO at Futur, which is an online platform which teaches designers how to run a creative business. That's also the topic of today's podcast, and Ben is the perfect person to talk about this as he has a really fascinating story. So he first became a designer, and then at the time of a financial crisis in 2008, he actually went into the law enforcement, only to come back to design a few years later. And he shares his fascinating story, how he went from charging $50 a logo to charging several $1,000s a logo. So specifically, we're going to talk a lot about running a creative business. A few topics that we covered are like why you should not look for more clients, but better clients. What to say to your clients when you try to raise your rates. And so Ben even shared almost like a script, word for word, that you could use when you call up your client to send them an email. And we also talk about what it takes to sell brand work at premium prices, like 5 or 6 figures. Just one more thing before diving into the episode. I've recently created an email course called Measuring Design, where I explain what are design metrics and how you can use them to measure your design work. And not only that, but also how you can present it to non-designers to basically show the value of your work. It's a free 5-day email course with a nice framework that I call Design Metric Canvas that you can use on your projects. So to get access to the course, please head to beyondusers.com. And now, without further ado, here's a conversation with Ben. So Ben, I love to start this podcast with getting to know the guest a little bit. So I wanted to ask you, what is your story of how you became a designer?
Yeah, definitely. So I was in high school and kind of stumbling around the arts department, and the one class that really spoke to me was photography. And I had been drawing for all my life, and I just felt like I wasn't good at it. I felt like I didn't live up to all the other students in my class. And really, technically, I was okay as far as my technical skill, but it was the creative spark that I was missing. And so I would always struggle with trying to find that idea to put down on the paper. And so photography was like this wonderful creative expression for me, where the idea phase, it seemed to come to me a lot easier. And it was more about documenting than it was actually creating something from a blank page. And so it definitely spoke to me. And a funny story about that is I started down my journey of photography in my sophomore year of high school. So in the States, that's the 10th grade. And by the time I was a senior, I had burned through all 4 of my high school's photography classes. And at the time, I was also in a band, and we had just competed in Battle of the Bands. So when I ran out of photography classes to take, I went to the advisor for our arts program, and I said, please, his name was Mr. Mercer. I said, please, Mr. Mercer, please let me take another photo class. I will go back and take photo 1. I just want to stay in the program. Well, Mr. Mercer just happened to be the chorus teacher for my high school. And he was like, let me do this deal with you. And the deal is because he had heard my band play at the Battle of the Bands, he says, I heard you sing, and I would like you to be in chorus. So here's the deal. I will create a photo 5 class just for you and allow you to take photo 5. You'll be the only student in the class if you join my chorus. And I said, yes, that was a no-brainer. So that's kind of how I took photography all through high school. But the funny thing is like, I don't know if the weight of the responsibility rested on my high school arts curriculum, but I had no idea what design even was. I didn't know design was a profession. While I was in photo classes, I started using Photoshop. I think Photoshop 1 had just came out, or 2, something, very, very basic. And I started playing around with, typography and things like that. But I never knew that design was a profession until college. So I got through the first 2 years of university before I realized that, oh, smokes, like I actually want to be a designer. Design is a career for me.
What made you feel that design is a career for you?
I think it goes back to that creative spark thing. I still struggle with that. Whenever I'm looking at a blank page, the idea just doesn't come. And I really feel like design is, for me personally, I know it's a very creative expression for other people, but it's a little bit more logical. And so I can create a lot easier because I can rely on the rules, the grids, like, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's all about the easy way to creativity.
Yeah, there is still a lot of work to do, even once you have the idea, right? So
yeah.
But tell me, like, how did you go from photography actually then to becoming a designer? So you said that now, okay, at this point in your story, now you know that design is a viable option. But then, how did you actually go about becoming a designer?
Sure, yeah. So after high school, I went to Clemson University, and I joined the graphic arts program there and was disappointed with it because it was less about creativity and more about printing processes. And at that point, Clemson was doing some really cool thing with textiles and different offset techniques and stuff like that. They were trying to engineer a piece of paper that would rearrange ink depending on the electrical stimulus. So they were doing some really cool stuff, but it wasn't anything that appealed to me. So I left there. I went to University of South Carolina, and University of USC there, I bounced around between a whole bunch of different programs. I started in advertising. I think I took one design class and then wound up in media arts. But I was in the marketing association and just I was all over the place. So it wasn't until I saw this internship for a junior graphic designer with an agency that it really kind of clicked with me. And so I said, set my resume in, got an interview. I walked into this place. I had, this black tie business suit situation walking into this creative agency. I sat down across the table from this, creative director that was like straight out of the 60s, just she had been to Ringling. And it was just like, looking back on myself, it's almost comical the way I walked up in that place, all dressed to the nines. But yeah, I interviewed for the spot, and I felt like the interview went great until she asked me to see my portfolio. And I looked at her and I said, "What is a portfolio?" I had no idea what a portfolio even was. But for some reason, she saw something in me, and she gave me kind of another shot. And she was like, "Okay, go away for, let's meet again tomorrow, the next day. I just want to see some examples of your work." And so I stayed up for 24 hours, pulled an all-nighter, and I just dug into the programs. I put together a proposal from scratch. I think I had 6 or 7 projects, and I brought it all in. Now, the work was horrible. I had no formal training in design. I had no informal training in design. But I think it's because of the work ethic and my willingness to kind of show up. She was like, "Okay, you got the job. This is it."
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of my intro into design as a career.
But tell me, like, now you're in a position where you are on the other side of the table, right? Recruiting people, I guess. If you would be in a position to that somebody would walk in a suit and tie with no portfolio, what would your reaction be?
Well, It's a little difficult to say. It really would depend on the person. You know, I have hired in the past designers that showed the same kind of work ethic that I did. I would rather hire somebody with a good fit, good culture fit, a good work ethic, somebody that I can see is going to hustle. I would rather hire that guy than the most talented designer who's not a good fit or whose personality just doesn't mesh. So I'd rather, hands down, I'd always rather hire the culture fit and the hard worker. That being said, in order to get an interview at Blind or the Future, the portfolio is kind of your way in. So if, we put out internship applications 4 times a year. And if you have an internship interview scheduled, that means your portfolio passes the test. That is the bar that we use to hire people. But I also think it's a little bit different environment now than it was then. If you don't have a website today as a designer, you're crazy. When back then it was that big black portfolio book that, weighs 1 million tons and you bring it into the interviews. So I think it's a different era too.
Mm-hmm. So when you look at these portfolios and the websites of designers that apply, is there anything in particular that you pay attention to?
Yeah, for a lot of the stuff that we do, when I'm hiring designers, typography skill is huge. They can be the best illustrator in the world, the most talented hand letterer, but if they don't have basic typography skills, it's kind of a no-brainer because everything boils down to layout and typography. So that's one key skill that all of the creative directors here are on the lookout for.
And that's because of the type of work you do, or because that's kind of the basic principle that you need to be good as a designer?
Well, a lot of times when we're looking for interns, we're looking for that person who's a little bit more of a Swiss Army knife, somebody that brings a lot of different skills to the table. So that's the skill and type is a great way to just make sure that they understand the fundamentals of design. If they have the eye and the talent to make something pop, even if it's just type. When we hire people for really specialized roles, it can be totally different. We will hire a calligrapher who has no typography experience whatsoever. And if that's the right fit for that job, that's great. If we hire a motion designer or a 3D artist, those guys aren't expected to have skill in typography. It's always a bonus, but it just kind of depends on the role.
Got it. I a little bit sidetracked the whole story that you started explaining. So you mentioned that now you work at Blind and the Future, but what happened in between getting that internship and then now ending up at Blind and the Future?
Oh man, everything happened. That's a lifetime. I guess what happened next is I went from that internship and grew in that company from junior design intern all the way up to senior designer. So I worked through college. I would work during the day and go to school at night. And then when I graduated, I got a full-time gig there. And I think I spent 3 or 4 years there in the agency there in Columbia, South Carolina, before I was like, let me go find something else. I just wanted to see. I don't know if I wanted to branch out or if I was just kind of looking for another gig. But I felt like it was time to move on, which was kind of heartbreaking because I loved working there. And I made kind of a stupid mistake. And that stupid mistake was I quit before I had another gig lined up. And that was 2008, which in the States, that was the start of the recession. And when recessions happened, creative careers they're the first to suffer. So there was no jobs in design. There's no jobs. Nobody was hiring freelancers. It was really not the climate to start an agency. And I wound up deciding to pull a 180 and try something else. So I I started applying for government agencies, and I was like, I'm watching 24. I could be Jack Bauer. That's cool. No problem. I got a messenger bag. And so I started at the top. I started with the federal government and applied all the way down, and eventually got a job as a police officer in Savannah, Georgia.
That is really like 180 degrees turn.
Yeah. And it was, I was excited. It was one of those things where it was like, it felt weird to do, but I felt like I was starting to get burned out. And that gave me the break that I needed. So I spent 4 years in the police department, 5 years, something like that. And, worked my way up from, patrol officer. I think I spent about 6 months on the street, and then I went and did another crazy thing, joined the military. So I was part-time National Guard, spent 6 months in training there. And then when I got back to the police department, I was promoted 3 or 4 times in a very rapid succession, and wound up working narcotics with the DEA in a multi-jurisdictional task force. So it was kind of like a rapid rise to running wires and doing undercover work and all that kind of stuff.
What made you then leave the law enforcement and go back to the design?
So as you kind of like grow in your career, it doesn't matter what it is, you get to these points where the next step is either a huge step forward that not many people get to take, or you kind of have a step backward. And I realized that I was sitting in the wire room. I was like, running these cases. And I realized that I was either going to stay here, or if I got promoted, I would go back to the streets. I'd have to put a uniform back on. I would have really crappy days off. And so I started looking for other options, and kind of simultaneously, I started to get that itch again to start creating. So I was like, let me just crack open my my computer. Let me pull open my laptop and start messing around with some old stuff. That turned into pulling in some freelance clients. And I realized that, I could start working while I was running these wiretaps, because there's these long stretches of time between calls. Drug dealers have to sleep too. And instead of watching movies or working out, and come to think of it, I probably should have worked out more. But instead of doing all that, I worked, and I would bring my laptop in. I would work on logos and websites and stuff like that. Eventually, I started making more money freelancing than I was pulling in from the government. And I was like, okay, I kind of have a decision here. I need to either pursue this or slow things down. And I chose to make the jump.
What kind of clients and projects was that? Were you just like freelancing on, at that time, popular websites where you basically applied as a designer, or was this something more fancy?
Oh, it definitely wasn't fancy. And, when I say that I was making more money doing that than I was, as a cop, that's not saying much, because police officers don't make a lot of money. So when I was, when I started freelancing, I was working with past connections. So people that I've known from the past. I think I got a job from my grandmother for her golf group once. It was just really small stuff, and it was very scattered. And then eventually I found Odesk. I think it's Upwork now, but Odesk at that point was it was pretty profitable. I was able to find some decent size budgets, but nowhere near where everyone should be. But in my mind at that point, hey, $100 for a logo, man, that's like 5 hours at the police department, because I was getting paid maybe $20 an hour for being a cop. So I was like, man, the money's here. And I'm just like, I became enthralled with the creative process again. And this passion just kind of erupted. And I realized that like, this is really why I'm here. And I think that my journey into law enforcement and a tactical career that had nothing to do with creativity, it was really, that's what showed me that passion kind of still existed. And so I jumped in with both feet.
So you were talking about charging $100 for a logo and this not being enough. And I mean, these days you can read a lot about, you know, you have to charge more, you have to be expensive and so on. But for someone who's just starting out, like, is this really a good advice?
I think it is. But that being said, is, you know, if $100 is worth it for you, then by all means go for it. You know, I don't want to judge anybody based on what they charge. That's not my purpose. I think that any logo is going to be more valuable to the client than $100, especially if it's a logo for a business, because they're going to turn around and use that brand for, you know, to hopefully pull in a whole lot more money. But I also don't want to like shame anybody based on what they're charging. If you're just starting out and you have no formal training in design and you know, this is just your first rodeo, you cracked open Photoshop, did a few tutorials and you're ready to go, then yeah, maybe $100 is a great fit. But at the same time, it's like, I would hope that you would hone your skill and hone your business acumen to the point where you can start charging more.
Yeah, I totally agree. I just feel like that sometimes or lately, a lot of people have been trying to just play on this card. Okay, I'm just going to charge a lot and then people are going to think that I'm premium without having any, you know, substantial background or experience. And that's where you get kind of cranky. But it makes sense. I think you have to grow kind of in this story and your career.
Yeah, and I also think that like there's a big difference between running a business and being a talented designer. So if you're not the one with talent, if you you know, want to go out and charge $50,000 for a logo, and you can find like a great designer to do that for you for less, well, now you're a business owner, you know, and there's a totally different vibe there. So that's what I said. I don't want to like judge anybody for doing what they need to do to make ends meet. But at the same time, you know, make sure that you're tall enough to ride the ride. Make sure that you have the skill and the product to back up the higher price point. But I also think on the flip side of that, we just flipped the sides like 4 times. But on the flip side, it's also very easy for creative people to get down on themselves. So before I met Chris, in those days of charging $100, $50, you know, $200 for a logo, I didn't think I was talented enough to charge more. And he took one look at my portfolio and he said, absolutely, you are. You need to 10x your rate right now. And so I think it's really, really easy for creatives to get down on themselves, especially because other people's work is so apparent. It's so easy to find amazing work that it's really easy to get down on yourself. So I think that's where kind of having an objective third party, like a mentor or someone to say, okay, yeah, you know, you're charging the right rate. Maybe you need to increase a little bit. Oh, no, you need to 10x. Having that objective third party in my case was great.
That's a very good point. Yeah, and since you mentioned Chris, I think this is a good point where you can also talk about the story of how Chris helped you increase your rates.
Yeah, definitely. And for the members of the audience that are not familiar with who Chris is, I work for the Future, and I also work for Blind. These are 2 companies owned by the same person, Chris Do. And Chris is an Emmy award-winning designer. Blind has been around for 22 years. It's his baby. He founded both companies. And Blind has done some pretty incredible work for many, many different Fortune 500 clients. Check us out. It's blind.com. The Future is an education platform that we teach designers business principles. And when I met Chris, it was at the beginning stages of the Future as it is now. At that point, there wasn't a brand. At that point, he just made some YouTube videos, and you know, that's kind of how I was exposed to him. So going back to my story, if that's cool, I don't know if
sure.
that would be. let's talk more about that. But yeah, I had been full-time freelancing for about a year. And I was really focused on how I can find more clients and do the work faster. And so for me, I felt like there was, and my story resonates with a lot of people because of the way that I felt here. I felt trapped under this really low ceiling of budgets. I felt like I could not charge anymore. I didn't realize that was a restriction that I put on myself, but that's how I felt. I felt like there's no way that I could get somebody to pay $1,000 for a logo, not in my wildest dreams. And so I was focusing on finding more clients. I wound up working 18 hours in a day. I had 53 clients. Each one of those clients had a different, like multiple projects each. And I was just grinding it out, and I was to the point of burnout again. And it was at that point that I discovered Chris's channel with his partner at the time, Jose Caballero. And they talked about raising rates and they talked about negotiating. And I was just so eternally grateful that I reached out to him over Facebook. And I pretty much just sent him a thank you note. I was like, hey, thanks for doing this. Please don't stop. Please don't go away. Please don't leave me. Please keep going. And it's YouTube. So I couldn't understand why this Emmy Award winning designer was giving this stuff away for free. And I just wanted to thank him. And he sends me a message back the next day. He says, yeah, no problem. Thank you. Do you want to chat? I was like, I was starstruck. I could not believe that this person out in Los Angeles that I had never met would want to talk to me. I was like, yeah, sure. Yes. I mean, what do you say to that? Right. You have to do it.
Of course.
So we get on the phone the next day, and one of his first pieces of advice to me was, I can't help you right now. You have to fire all of your clients. And at that moment, it was just like the scene from all the war movies where like the bomb goes off and then you hear the ringing and no other sound happens.
Yeah.
It was kind of that moment for me. And I was like, holy crap. Like, oh my God. My wife and I at that point were trying to get pregnant and we were trying to start a family and we had just moved. And I was like, I can't fire all my clients. And I said, okay, how do I do this? And he walked me through it. So the next day, that very, very next day, I called 53 clients and had 53 awkward conversations, and all of my clients left. I fired all of my clients except 3. And 3 companies valued the work that I did so much that they were willing to pay a much staggeringly higher rate to keep me on the books and to keep me working with them. And so those 3 clients, the next month, they represented more income, more revenue than all 53 combined for the previous month.
That's really awesome. But take us maybe into the details of these stories. So how did you prepare for these calls? You said that Chris kind of walked you through how to do it. So what exactly was your preparation for this process? Like, how do you actually call and what do you say in this call?
Yeah. So he and I worked out a script right there on the phone, and it was a very simple formula. And I'm hoping that I can remember it off the top of my head, but it went something like this. I had to open, I said, hey, listen, do you have some time to talk? Because this is one of those things that, needs some time. Right. So if they didn't have 10 to 15 minutes, I called them back, and every single thing, each conversation happened over the phone, which is vital. This is not something that you can do over email. And so, I spoke with every single person. I said, listen, do you have the time to talk? Okay, great. I think it went something like this. Hey, Johnny, listen, I hope you can understand. This is very awkward for me to talk about. It's very difficult for me to say, but I have to run a profitable business. And at the rates that we've been working on, is I can't make ends meet. I'm going to have to raise my rates. And I gave him the rate, I said, I have to raise my rate to $100 an hour with a minimum retainer of 10 hours a month. If that's not something that you can swing, I totally understand. We'll have to part ways, but that's kind of where I'm at. So again, it was a lot smoother, but that was kind of the gist of it. It was like, here's the situation. I have to do this because I'm raising a family. I'm trying to run a profitable business, and I can't continue on at this rate. And if you can't join me, that's okay. We'll have to part ways. And a lot of it was, the responses were very amicable. I mean, everybody was like, hey, I totally agree. I get it. I can't afford those new rates, but I totally understand and wish you the best of luck.
Mm-hmm. So 50 people I actually told you right away, no?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay.
And that, honestly, that was hard to hear.
Yeah.
That was hard to hear. But a lot of them were clients that I sourced off Odesk. And the clients that go to sites like Odesk and Fiverr, they're looking for the deal because they know if they go down the street to the ad agency or the design studio or find someone like talented designer on Instagram or, they're looking for the deal. They know they can't afford those other people. Mm-hmm. So a lot of my clients were startups. A lot of them were, garage startups, which is, just let's see if I can fund this business out of my checking account and the spare money I have after my 9 to 5. And so there was just no way that they could afford that. And that's okay because that's not a good fit for where I needed to be. Mm-hmm. And so acknowledging that not every client is a good fit was huge for me.
So today, how do you choose clients? How do you recognize a good client?
Yeah, it's it kind of breaks down to two main things maybe three. Number one, do we like you? Do we like working with you? Are you a nice person? Because if the chemistry is not there, the relationship it's not going to work. More importantly, can we help solve your problems? Do we offer a service that's going to solve your problem? Because if somebody came in and said, listen, the problem that I'm having, and this is actually an applicable example. A lot of times we get leads from our website that is people wondering, they go to blind.com and they're like, hey, I'm interested in getting my whole house outfitted with new blinds. Obviously, that's not a good fit, right? So we don't offer a service
obviously.
So we don't offer a service that fits or that solves those problems. That's the second test. And the third test is, can you afford our services? And that's usually the kicker. And so if we like you, if we can solve your problems, and if you can afford working with us, and if you're ready to invest the level that Blind needs, we're there.
Okay, so this is another very important point. So how and when do you ask a client if he or she can afford you?
That's a great question. So that leads into qualifying them on the call. So a lot of designers are very hesitant to talk about money, especially in the first or second call. And that is by policy, something that we require our producers and then myself, whoever's handling new business, we have to ask about money in the first call. And there's a million different tactics, the ways of fleshing out budgets or seeing if we're going to be on the same page. They're all over our YouTube channel. My favorite is the budget range. So typically we anchor high, which means we want to set the price bracket. The low number needs to be, where we want to be. So we want to anchor that part of the conversation high. And typically we just ask them like, hey, do you have a budget? Now the client's never going to say, yes, we have a budget. It's never going to happen. They think that by dropping the first number, they lose all power in the negotiation. So it's like, no, we don't have a budget. We're working on something else. Then we say, okay, well, typically projects in this range, they typically range from 100,000 to 500,000. Is that a range that you're comfortable working within? Or is that an investment that you're willing to make depending on the client? And they're either going to fall off their chair or they're going to say, yeah, we could probably work something out. And they're always, if they're willing to work in the range, they'll always say something to the effect of, Yeah, it's probably going to be near the lower side. It's hands down. It always happens like that. So that's just a really effective way because you can tell by their reaction. If they're like sputtering and they passed out and fell out of their chair and they're like, oh my God, then obviously they're not a good fit. And then you can come back and say, okay, well, hey, listen, before I say no, that's another powerful, Christoism. Before I say no, did you have a range in mind? Because, depending on the scope, there may be something we can work out. And if our anchor is 100 to 500K and they come back at 50, well, maybe there's something we can do. Maybe we can reduce the scope. Maybe we can find somebody in our audience to hand the work off to. There's a lot of different things that we can do there. But really what we're trying to do is, even when we talk about money, we're trying to provide the client some value. So if they can't afford us, if they're not a good fit for Blind, we're going to do the best we can to pair them with somebody that can help them.
Mm-hmm.
Except for those blinds guys, the guys that want blinds for their house. We don't help those guys out.
Totally. But look, I see brand and like logos as notoriously hard to sell. And correct me if I'm wrong, but like, how do you sell such work, especially at these rates?
Can you define your question?
Yeah. So what I mean by that is, let's say if you go to McKinsey or any of these management consultancies, you are paying, like they maybe come in and they give you, they try to cut some costs and they tell you, hey, this project is going to cost 300K, but you're going to save $1 million. So it's easy to calculate. Yeah, it makes sense to pay for this project. But when I go to a branding agency and they ask me for 100, 200, 300K, whatever, I would assume that for a business person, it's much harder to, pay that kind of money.
I see. So it's very easy for you to sell consulting services because you can pitch the thing on an ROI basis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So instead of an ROI basis on the projected numbers that you can save them or the cost savings or the revenue increase, why not look at the ROI in terms of what the client is going to value this transaction, this new logo, this new identity, and phrase it that way in the sales cycle. So why not ask them, hey, listen, 3 years down the road, you're very happy with the new identity. You're very happy with the project, with your life, with your business. What happened? What happened there that made you so happy? And they'll say something to the effect of like, oh, well, we got the new logo and that increased sales, we increased sales 130%, more than doubled. And it's like, okay, well, what's that? Or maybe it's as simple as like the new website works great and it's saving me freaking 10 hours a week. And then you can easily say, okay, well, what's that 10 hours a week worth to you? Okay, so if it's worth $10,000 every single week, I can't even do that math, but we would be, how much would you pay if I offered you an insurance policy on this? How much would you pay for that problem not to happen or for that problem to be solved? And then typically they'll say something like, oh man, if it's going to save me, if I'm going to value this at $1 million, if it's going to bring me $500,000 of business, I would pay $100,000 for that. And bam, now you're into the ROI discussion. So that's a little bit of an advanced kind of negotiating technique. But really, when we look at like selling a logo for a high dollar point, we're positioned in the marketplace to be one of the premium branding agencies around. So when the right client comes calling, they're expecting to spend that much. And it's not about the ROI of the logo. These clients are buying assurance that the job is going to be done right, it's going to be done effectively, and they're not going to have to worry about anything in the process. That's the major factor. That's why positioning is so powerful. Because when clients come to us, they're already primed to invest more money in the identity system than say somebody who's looking for a solution on Fiverr.
Mm-hmm. And Ben, like you always talk about the importance of, you as a designer finding your strong point and the kind of positioning in the market.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you do that? Like, how do you find the thing you want to specialize in, and then how do you position yourself on the market correctly?
So this kind of goes back to who you are and what you want to do. A lot of our audience are solopreneurs. They're people with, maybe one employee or a small team, but most of them are just kind of running solo. And so for those people, I say, look at the intersection of your interests and the thing that you can make money at and what you're good at. I think we have this, there's a download somewhere on the Future site that has these concentric circles. And you look for the center of the Venn diagram. And say I am a brilliant logo designer. And I'm really passionate about, I'm an Eagle Scout personally, so I'm really passionate about outdoor sports and, kind of like extreme sports and those kind of activities. And then I'm really good at logo design, and logo design is something I can make money at. And so I could specialize in identity design for the extreme sports industry. So you look for those, like the intersection of the Venn diagram.
Makes sense. Yeah. But then how do you position yourself? Like once you find that strong point, how do you go from selling a logo for 5K to 50K?
Gotcha.
Is it something that just happens right from the get-go? Or is it something you have to develop over time?
I think it could happen either way. I mean, with my experience in Burnt Creative, we went from selling, I was alone in my loft selling $50 and $100 logos. And then almost overnight, we just increased everything to in the thousands. So it was $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 identity systems. That happened overnight. So that was an exponential increase. And that was just purely self-confidence thing. It was like, hey, yeah, I'm worth this. And projecting that out there and reworking the website to have a little bit more, better positioning. Instead of Ben Burns Creative, it became Burnt Creative. Instead of I, it became we. So we were positioned, very differently in the marketplace. Then, without changing positioning, really, as the confidence increased and as my network increased, I was able to make contacts with people higher up in larger industries. And this happened organically, taking people out to lunch, just getting to know people in the community. And eventually we stumbled into several tens of thousands of dollars identity projects. So one $20,000 logo, another $30,000 identity project. And once you're used to operating at this certain tier, and once you can carry yourself in a certain way and talk about the way that you work in a certain way, doors start to open. So it's kind of like the network has to be there. You have to people have to know about you and of you. And then you have to be confident enough to ask for the higher budgets and be willing to say no to the clients that don't fit.
So you talk a lot about these things also on your website, on the Future, and also on your YouTube channel. And this is another topic that I actually wanted to discuss with you, basically the design education. We can start really broad and then let's see where we get to. So the first thing I wanted to ask you is, what do you feel like is missing in a traditional design school? So what did you feel, what did you basically start with in the Future?
This is a great question. Unfortunately, I'm not the right person to ask because I didn't go to design school. What I graduated from was this media arts program, and it was kind of the bucket of at University of South Carolina threw all their creative classes in that didn't fit anywhere else. So I had a video game class and I had a programming class and just a couple of other things that they didn't know what to do with. So they put in a bucket and called it media arts. That being said, I have recognized in people that I've hired, people that I work with, that have gone to these design educations, and in my own curriculum, as somebody who graduated from a creative program, not necessarily a design program, I don't think that you're exposed to any business principles, which is really kind of messed up because as a designer, your primary job is to solve problems, right? Whether that's a communication problem, a perspective problem, your job is to solve problems. And if you don't understand the business reason behind the problem that you're asked to solve, you can't be as effective as somebody who knows what you're trying to do. And so learning these business principles, learning how to negotiate, and learning how to the reason why people want to employ you will only make you a better designer. And that's just for people who want to learn better at their craft. Mm-hmm. Then there's the people who want to be entrepreneurs. And these guys, like, you graduate from design school, you graduate from a creative education program, and you go to start your own business. They're lacking the business principles. They're lacking the primary knowledge that it takes to open and run the business. It sounds judgmental to say, but that was me. I started a business with nothing. I mean, I spent some time in the small business association in Savannah there, but I had no idea what I was doing. So there's this severe lack of knowledge, even as something as simple as saving for taxes, paying estimated taxes, when to hire your first employee, when to, how to lead people, how to manage and delegate. All this stuff is never taught in traditional creative programs and design schools. And that's where I see the gap. And it's vital.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. I agree. If you would have to point out just one or two skills that you feel designers coming into the Blind and the Futur lack, what would you point out?
That's a great question. I would say communication skills. And I want to get a little bit more specific. Mm-hmm. So in design school, from my understanding, you have to talk about work, right? And the terms that you use are often understand inside the design community, but they're really difficult for business people and the lay people of the world, the non-designers, to understand. And so what I would encourage people is to work on your communication and presentation skills, because that's going to be vital no matter what you decide to do in your design career. Whether you're pitching a new logo for a client and you're showing them options, or you're trying to convince your superior, maybe you work in-house at a bank somewhere, that this color is the right color to go with. Working on those communication skills it's essential. So that's where I see, some pretty dramatic improvement to be made. And then in terms of like actual design skill, I don't know. I really think that, going back to the basics of typography, layout, using the grid, that kind of stuff, it can't hurt to at least review.
Mm-hmm. So how would you say is the curriculum of the Futur different from a typical design school's curriculum?
So at this point, we are filling gaps. So we have a lot of business tools. We have a lot of business courses that deal with negotiating and setting up an infrastructure and delegating and strategy and, doing discovery the right way, project management, a lot of things that the typical design school does not cover. Mm-hmm. So that's really where we see our value. And as the Futur evolves, I can see us adding the things that, the design schools are teaching. So we already have a typography course, which is kind of unique because the typography course, it's very difficult to find typography education online for some reason. It's like the basics of graphic design, and you can't find it on Skillshare, you can't find it on Udemy. A lot of these things are just they're just not taught online. So our mission right now is to fill the gaps. Whatever design school doesn't teach, whatever design education that you can't find in the wild, that's where we kind of come in and help. But in the future, I could see, I think that our curriculum is going to involve, is going to evolve to include all the standard stuff that you do learn in design school currently.
Hey, let's kind of take the segue towards the end of the conversation. I have a few final questions for you. Sure. So the first one is, what is the worst advice that you hear being given to young designers?
Oh man, I'll give you this in a story.
Even better.
And it's not even really a story because there's no characters, there's no time, there's no specific narrative, but sometime in between me being absolutely obsessed with photography and going to college, somewhere in that 2 to 3 years, somebody told me that I couldn't make money as a photographer. And I am to this day just haunted that I listened. And I'm just like, and I think that has impacted me in a huge way, because for a long time I believed that you couldn't make money at being creative. And that's so not the case. You know, you can make infinitely more money in a creative career than in a lot of other options. So, you know, that was just that piece of advice that somebody told me, like, yeah, you can't make money in that. And I wish that I remembered who that was, because I would go back and just smack them. That was probably the worst advice that somebody gave me.
Okay, and then turning it around, what advice would you give to young designers?
So I've said this before, and I think that it's important to realize that nobody has the right answer. Nobody has the magic bullet, especially when you're trying to start a business or a freelance career or navigating inside the design field. Somebody's path, somebody's decisions that they've made may not be the right thing for you. And so I see a lot of designers like on this quest to figure out the key or the magic bullet or the solution for a problem that doesn't have a master key, that doesn't have a magic bullet. So I would say, remain humble, but just realize that nobody has the one right answer.
Okay, and the final question is, what is the one thing about design that you've changed your mind about?
Well, I think it's more of a perception shift. Back in the day, I was very concerned with aesthetics. I was a pixel pusher. I really like to get things perfect. And, at this phase in my career, I realized that the impact of that chase of perfection is it's not as important in the grand scheme of things. And so I think that my perspective on design has shifted, not in the value of design is still there, but the aesthetics don't have an intrinsic value to me anymore. And that has been kind of a seismic shift in my approach and my perspective on design.
I've seen it also written on the Future's website, saying kind of design is more than just the aesthetics, right?
Yes. Yeah. Design is greater than graphics. It's
exactly.
all about solving problems. It really is. And if you can solve somebody's problems, even if you have a couple pixels out of place, then mission accomplished.
Awesome. And I think that's a great place to also thank you for your time and to finish this conversation, maybe just as a last question or opportunities. So I just want to give you an opportunity also to tell listeners where they can find more about you, like, I don't know, Twitter, LinkedIn, or how can they get in touch with you?
I am most responsive on Instagram. My Instagram handle is Mr. Ben Burns. I'm actually Mr. Ben Burns everywhere. YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. You can find me by just typing in Mr. Ben Burns, except for Twitter, in which case, if you find the Mr. Ben Burns and if you get a hold of him, tell him to release my username, because on Twitter, I am Mr. Ben Burns _. So that's where you can find me. Perfect. And you can also find me on the Future's channels. So that's The Future is here on all major social media, and then thefuture.com.
Cool. And I'll include the links in the show notes. Thanks again, Ben.
Awesome. Thank you. It was really a pleasure. I had fun.
Cool. Cool, that's it in today's episode. If you do like this show or this episode, I kindly ask you to consider leaving a review or a comment on iTunes or any other podcast app for that matter. This really helps me a lot in getting great guests, and also it helps other listeners find this show easier on these crowded podcasts apps. And again, if you're interested in how to measure design, to basically show the value of your design work to non-designers, and to also know yourself how you're doing, like how you can track the progress of your work, head to beyondusers.com, and there you can sign up for a 5-day free email course. And in there you will learn what design metrics are, how you can use them on your projects, and you'll also get to download a free design metric canvas, which is a framework that you can use in your projects to identify all the appropriate and necessary metrics. So for that, head to beyondusers.com. Cool, that's it for today. Thanks for your attention and see you soon.